A rigid and poised flight attendant stood firmly at the entrance of the first-class cabin, blocking the way of a man who, in her eyes, did not belong. Without hesitation, she dismissed him, failing to recognize that he was none other than Shaquille O'Neal, the basketball legend and, more importantly, the owner of the airline. This story is not just about arrogance and prejudice, it is about transformation and the unexpected power of humility. Imagine the shock of discovering you had just denied access to your own boss. What would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to never miss another unforgettable tale. Shaquille O'Neal, a giant both on and off the court, had conquered the business world after his sports career, becoming a significant shareholder in multiple corporations, including Horizon Air. Despite the airline's stellar reputation for luxury, Shaq knew numbers and reports only told part of the story. To truly understand the passenger experience, he decided to go undercover, disguising himself as an everyday traveler. The morning at JFK Airport was bustling with movement as travelers made their way through the terminals. Among them stood Shaq, dressed nothing like his usual high-profile self. His attire, a loose, faded hoodie, worn-out sneakers, and an overstuffed backpack, made him blend in rather than stand out. His immense stature, however, turned heads. People stole glances, some recognizing him but dismissing the idea that an NBA icon would be traveling incognito. Shaq simply smiled, unfazed, ready to observe firsthand how passengers were truly treated. Approaching the self-check-in kiosk, he retrieved his first-class ticket. Unlike the sleek boarding passes handed to VIPs, this was a crumpled slip of paper, barely holding itself together. He folded it and slipped it into his hoodie's pocket, strolling towards the boarding gate. Jessica Stone, the gate's lead flight attendant, stood tall with impeccable posture. Her neatly tied hair and pristine uniform gave her an air of authority. Yet beneath this poised exterior, she carried the weight of financial struggles and family burdens. To her, maintaining control at work was a necessity, not a choice. When Shaq stepped forward, Jessica's eyes immediately locked onto him. She scanned his outfit, her lips pressing into a thin line. He didn't fit the profile of a first-class passenger. Her instincts told her he had made a mistake or, worse, was trying to slip through where he didn't belong. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice firm but professional. "This section is for first-class travelers only." Shaq, ever the gentleman, flashed a warm smile. "I know," he said casually, pulling out his ticket. Jessica took one look at the crumpled slip and raised an eyebrow. It was nothing like the embossed tickets she was used to seeing from high-paying customers. She hesitated, then asked, "Did you purchase this yourself?" There was a subtle challenge in her tone. Nearby passengers turned their heads, their curiosity piqued. Shaq could feel their judgmental stares, some whispering amongst themselves. "Yes," he answered, his expression unchanged. "I bought it myself." Jessica pursed her lips and sighed. "Let me scan it." She took the ticket and, with a swift motion, passed it under the scanner. The beep of confirmation made her pause, her mask of confidence slipping for a fraction of a second. She blinked but quickly regained her composure. "Enjoy your flight," she said stiffly, handing back the ticket. But there was a stiffness in her tone, a resistance to acknowledging her misjudgment. Shaq nodded, stepping past her and into the first-class cabin. He could feel Jessica's eyes lingering on him, but he didn't look back. Instead, he observed the subtle shifts in the atmosphere as he entered. Other passengers, dressed in designer suits and expensive jewelry, offered side glances. Some returned to their conversations, dismissing him entirely, while others watched with interest, silently questioning how he had made his way into their space. As he settled into his seat, a flight attendant appeared almost instantly beside a well-dressed businessman nearby, offering a complimentary drink. Shaq received no such welcome. Instead, there was hesitation, as if the staff was unsure of how to approach him. Minutes later, Jessica entered the cabin, her gaze sweeping over the passengers. When her eyes landed on Shaq, she hesitated. Something about him felt familiar, yet she couldn't place it. Pushing aside her unease, she continued with her duties, ensuring every first-class passenger was attended to, except him. The flight progressed, and Shaq quietly observed the nuances of service around him. Drinks were poured for some before they even asked, while he sat unnoticed. Gourmet meals were offered with warm smiles to others, yet he had to ask for his. None of it surprised him, but it reaffirmed what he had suspected. Judgment was swift, and first impressions often dictated treatment. Hours into the flight, a turbulence warning prompted Jessica to do a final walkthrough. As she approached Shaq's seat, she noticed something unexpected. He had taken out a notebook, scribbling observations. Curiosity got the best of her. Taking notes? She asked, attempting to sound casual. Shaq looked up, smiling. Yeah, just making some observations. Jessica's interest deepened. About what? He hesitated for a beat before replying. About how people are treated when they don't look the part. A flash of understanding crossed her face, but she quickly masked it. Before she could respond, the intercom crackled, announcing the final descent. Jessica moved on, but something about their brief exchange lingered in her mind. As the plane landed and passengers began gathering their belongings, the final twist of fate arrived. The airline's regional manager had come aboard to greet an important guest, the airline's owner. When he stopped in front of Shaq and greeted him warmly, Jessica froze. "Mr. O'Neill, we appreciate you flying with us today," the manager said, shaking Shaq's hand. Jessica's breath hitched. Her mind raced, replaying every moment of their interaction. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. She had judged, dismissed, and belittled not just any passenger, but the owner of the very airline she worked for. Shaq, sensing her shock, simply smiled. "Great service today," he said, his tone light but meaningful. Jessica swallowed hard, her usual confidence wavering. Words failed her, but her expression spoke volumes. As Shaq walked past her toward the exit, he paused and looked back. "Next time," he said kindly, "judge less. Serve more." With that, he disappeared down the jet bridge, leaving Jessica standing there, her face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and reflection. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't the one in control. And just like that, a lesson was learned, not just for Jessica, but for everyone watching. Because sometimes, the person you underestimate the most turns out to be the one who changes your perspective forever. Jessica moved through the cabin with calculated precision, her expression a mask of polite professionalism. The soft hum of the aircraft provided a rhythmic backdrop to her movements as she checked the overhead compartments and adjusted the placement of neatly folded blankets. She exuded an air of efficiency, yet there was an unmistakable undercurrent of tension in the way her fingers clutched the service tray just a little too tightly. As she walked past a row of seats, her gaze landed momentarily on Shaq. It wasn't a glance of acknowledgement but rather one of quiet scrutiny. His attire, a simple tracksuit, comfortable sneakers, stood in stark contrast to the expensive suits and designer handbags surrounding him. The moment was fleeting, but in that instant, it was clear, Jessica had already made her assessment. Pausing at a distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit and a Rolex gleaming on his wrist, Jessica's demeanor shifted. She leaned in slightly, offering a warm, practiced smile. "Good evening, sir. Thank you for flying with Horizon Air. May I offer you a glass of champagne while we prepare for takeoff?" The man gave a nod of approval, clearly appreciating the attention. Jessica poured the champagne with careful precision, setting it down before him with a practiced grace. Without missing a beat, she moved on, her heels clicking softly against the carpeted aisle. When she reached Shaq's row, her demeanor changed once more. There was no engaging smile, no warm greeting. Instead, she handed him a hot towel with a neutral expression, barely making eye contact. The towel, unlike the pristine, lightly scented ones given to the others, was slightly crumpled and damp. Shaq received it with a polite nod, saying nothing, but he noticed everything. Megan Price, a fellow flight attendant, entered the cabin shortly after, radiating a warmth that seemed to brighten the confined space. Her smile was genuine, her voice soft yet engaging. As she made her way through the cabin, she extended the same level of courtesy to each passenger, never differentiating between status or attire. "Good evening. May I offer you something to drink? Water, wine, or champagne?" When Megan reached Shaq's seat, she met his eyes directly, offering him the same kindness as everyone else. "Here's your hot towel," she said with a smile. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" "Just water, please," Shaq replied, observing the stark contrast between the two attendants. Megan treated each guest with equal importance, making even the most ordinary traveler feel valued. Jessica, on the other hand, operated with an unspoken hierarchy, prioritizing those she deemed worthy of her best service. As the plane taxied down the runway, Shaq leaned back in his seat, eyes fixed on the world beyond the window but ears keenly attuned to the activity around him. He listened to the small exchanges, the polite conversations, the forced laughter. The disparity in treatment extended beyond the attendants. It was ingrained in the entire atmosphere of first class. Jessica moved with swift efficiency, yet her movements lacked the ease that came with genuine enjoyment of one's work. Her gestures were sharp, precise, yet devoid of warmth. Megan, however, had a natural grace, a quiet joy that reflected in the way she interacted with passengers, whether they were dressed in luxury brands or simple clothing. Shaq took it all in, understanding that this flight would be more than just a journey to a destination. It was an opportunity to witness human nature in its raw, unfiltered state. And Jessica, with all her rigid composure, had unwittingly become the focal point of his silent observation. Jessica returned to the service area, her fingers instinctively reaching for her phone the moment she was out of passengers' sight. A series of unread messages lit up the screen. "Sis, I need help with rent this month. I swear this is the last time. Please." Her jaw tightened as she quickly typed a reply. "You need to figure things out, Evan. I can't keep doing this. Stop texting me about money." She hit send, exhaling sharply as she stuffed the phone back into her pocket. The weight of responsibility pressed against her, an invisible force that had been growing heavier with each passing month. Since their mother's passing, Jessica had taken on the role of provider, working relentless hours to keep her younger brother afloat. But the well of patience was running dry. Her tension seeped into her work. When a businessman impatiently tapped his glass, signaling for more champagne, Jessica plastered on a smile, but the tightness in her jaw betrayed her true feelings. She poured the drink swiftly, barely acknowledging his presence before moving on. Across the cabin, Megan was tending to a young mother struggling to comfort a fussy baby. Without hesitation, Megan knelt beside her seat, whispering reassurances and offering an extra blanket to help soothe the child. There was no frustration, no exasperation, only an unspoken understanding that kindness often held more value than efficiency. Jessica watched from afar, something flickering in her expression. A question nagged at the edges of her mind. How does she do it? How does she carry the same weight but still find the strength to smile? She was too consumed by her own exhaustion to realize the impact her demeanor had on those around her. Shaq, still quietly observing, noted the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed against the tray when she thought no one was looking. He didn't know her story, but he recognized the signs. The weight of unspoken burdens had a way of eroding patience, replacing it with quiet resentment. The flight continued, the hours melting away into a blur of routine service and quiet observations. Jessica moved through the cabin with practiced steps, but something within her had shifted. She found herself paying closer attention to Megan's interactions, the way she listened, the way she offered more than just service, she offered presence. By the time the plane began its descent, Jessica felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping in, a longing for something she couldn't quite define. As she made her final rounds, her gaze met Shaq's once more. There was no judgment in his eyes, only quiet understanding. As the passengers disembarked, Megan was the first to receive warm farewells, passengers thanking her for her kindness. Jessica, for the first time, found herself questioning the impact she left behind. Was efficiency enough? Or had she lost something essential along the way? Shaq stepped off the plane, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. He didn't need to say a word, he had already seen what he needed to. Some changes happened in an instant. Others took time. But Jessica, whether she realized it or not, was standing at the crossroads of her own story, and the choice of which path to take was hers alone. And sometimes, it only took a single moment, a single choice, to change everything. Everywhere she looked, Carmen kept her head bowed, as if lowering her gaze could somehow make her less noticeable. The feeling of being an outsider wasn't new to her, it had followed her throughout her life. Years of working tirelessly to support herself and her family had shaped her into someone who felt out of place in moments of ease. Luxury was a foreign concept, And now, seated in an unfamiliar space that radiated wealth, she couldn't shake the discomfort. Instead of embracing the experience, she wanted to shrink into the background. A voice interrupted her thoughts. How does it feel being here for the first time? Shaw, seated beside her, observed her with quiet curiosity. His voice was deep, steady, and unexpectedly warm. Carmen turned her head slightly, startled. There was something disarming about the way he spoke, something that made her feel safer than she expected. She hesitated before replying, her voice barely above a whisper. Honestly, I don't think I belong here. Shaw's brow lifted slightly. Who told you that? She exhaled, her fingers twisting in her lap. No one had to. Look at them. She gestured subtly at the other passengers. They fit in. They belong. And me, I just want to sit here and not be noticed. Shaw leaned back, his expression thoughtful. You know, belonging isn't about fitting in. It's about being where you deserve to be. And you deserve to be here as much as anyone else. A small, hesitant smile crossed her lips. It wasn't full, but it was something, a slight release of tension that had been wrapped around her for too long. They fell into conversation, sharing pieces of their lives, their journeys leading them to this exact moment. Carmen spoke of her cousin in Zurich, of how she had always encouraged her to break free from the constraints she had unknowingly built around herself. I've always worked so hard, she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. But when it comes to doing something for myself, I hesitate. It feels selfish. Like I'm taking more than I should. Shaw nodded, his expression unreadable at first, then softened. Carmen, you've earned this. You're not taking anything from anyone by allowing yourself to experience life. The only thing standing in your way is your own doubt. She looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, something inside her shifted. Their moment was interrupted when Jessica, one of the flight attendants, arrived with drinks. Her gaze flicked over Carmen briefly, cool and indifferent, before placing a glass of water in front of her. Without a word, she turned and left, her demeanor unmistakably distant. Carmen frowned slightly, her voice barely above a whisper as she turned to Shaw. I don't think she likes me very much. Shaw chuckled softly. Don't take it personally. Some people carry their moods on their sleeves. His words were easy, but his gaze followed Jessica for a moment, thoughtful. The conversation between Carmen and Shaw resumed, lighter now. Laughter slipped in between their words, a warmth settling where uncertainty once sat. You know, Carmen mused, it feels like talking to an old friend. Not someone I just met on a plane. Shaw grinned. Maybe we knew each other in another life. Their conversation was cut short by a sudden sharp cry from the economy cabin. The sound was piercing, raw. The child's cries continued, carrying through the first-class section, drawing subtle frowns from some passengers. Carmen turned her head slightly as Jessica walked past, muttering under her breath, crying kids in economy. Always a disturbance. Shaw's expression hardened slightly. He watched as Megan, another flight attendant, responded with gentle concern, walking toward the family in need. Jessica, however, merely shook her head. We can't be everyone's babysitter, she scoffed before walking off. Shaw leaned forward slightly, observing. It wasn't just Carmen Jessica dismissed. There was a pattern to her coldness, a preference for certain passengers over others, an impatience for anything that fell outside of what she deemed acceptable. The plane jolted slightly as it entered a pocket of turbulence. The seatbelt light flickered on, and Carmen immediately gripped the armrests, her knuckles white. Her breath came quicker, panic creeping into her eyes. Shaw noticed and spoke gently. Breathe, Carmen. It's normal. Just part of the journey. She turned to him, his steady presence anchoring her. Are you sure? He nodded. Completely. The pilots have everything under control. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to relax. Thanks, she whispered. I don't think I could have handled that alone. Shaw smiled. You're stronger than you think. Jessica returned to the first-class cabin, her usual detached air about her. But as she passed, her gaze fell on Megan, who had crouched beside the distressed mother in economy, whispering words of reassurance to her. The contrast was stark. Megan exuded warmth, offering a helping hand where Jessica turned away. Shaw observed the moment, taking in the subtle divide between those who chose kindness and those who didn't. He made a mental note of it, the way people treated each other when no one was watching. There was always more to people than they let on. As the flight continued, Carmen found herself more at ease. She no longer sat curled into herself, no longer trying to disappear into the background. She let herself enjoy the moment, the company, the experience. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe, just a little, that she belonged. The seatbelt sign turned off, and the hum of conversation resumed. Shaw leaned back, casting a last glance toward the curtain separating the cabins. There was always more to see, more to understand. But for now, he simply let himself enjoy the present. Carmen smiled at him, a silent thank you in her eyes. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. As the aircraft trembled amidst the turbulent skies, Megan, a compassionate flight attendant, gently draped a warm blanket over the young child. The little one's sobs gradually subsided, their tear-streaked eyes finding solace in their mother's embrace. Observing this tender moment, Jessica, another flight attendant, couldn't help but frown. Her demeanor was icy, silently questioning why Megan would expend energy on such a trivial matter. From his seat, Shaq took note of the stark contrast between the two attendants. Megan wasn't merely performing her duties, she genuinely cared for every passenger, irrespective of their social standing. Jessica, conversely, appeared ensnared in a relentless cycle of fatigue and stress, leaving her devoid of patience or empathy for anyone who didn't conform to her ideals of impeccable conduct. Once the turbulence abated and the plane regained its stability, Megan returned to the first-class cabin. As she passed by Shaq, she paused momentarily, offering a warm smile. "We made it through. Would you like some more water?" she inquired. Shaq returned her smile, shaking his head. "No, thank you. You're doing a wonderful job." Megan seemed pleasantly surprised by his compliment, her smile broadening before she continued down the aisle. Shaq leaned back, reflecting on the interactions he'd witnessed. He didn't perceive Jessica as inherently unkind. It was evident she was grappling with pressures he had yet to comprehend. These burdens had seemingly eroded her capacity for kindness. Megan, in contrast, exemplified how one could transcend personal challenges to offer comfort to others. Shaq resolved to continue his observations, sensing that the intricate dynamics between Jessica, Megan, and the other passengers were gradually becoming clearer. As the flight progressed, Jessica meandered down the aisle, her gaze meticulously assessing each passenger. She endeavored to remain focused on her responsibilities, but her thoughts persistently drifted to the tall man seated near the rear of the first-class section. From the moment Shaq had boarded, Jessica sensed something unusual about him. He didn't fit the mold of the typical first-class traveler, those who exuded confidence and an air of affluence. What truly unsettled her was Shaq's unwavering gaze. Each time she passed, his eyes followed her movements, not with judgment, but with a keen, unreserved interest. He seemed to scrutinize everything. Her service methods, her interactions with passengers, even the minutiae she assumed went unnoticed. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling of being under evaluation. She observed Shaq frequently jotting notes on his phone. Occasionally, he'd recline, one hand cradling a glass of water, the other typing swiftly. This behavior only deepened her suspicions. Most first-class passengers occupied themselves with magazines, in-flight entertainment, or indulged in fine beverages, not silent observation and note-taking. Taking a deep breath, Jessica attempted to dismiss her unease. Perhaps he's a journalist working on a story, she mused, or simply an overly curious individual. Regardless, it shouldn't concern her. Yet, deep down, Shaq's presence continued to unnerve her. Meanwhile, Shaq's observations of Jessica's conduct persisted. He noticed she lavished attention on passengers she deemed significant. Those adorned in designer attire or bearing luxury accessories received her warmest smiles and most attentive service. In contrast, passengers of more modest means, like Carmen or an elderly gentleman seated nearby, were met with indifference, if not outright neglect. At one juncture, the elderly man struggled to hoist his suitcase into the overhead compartment. Jessica walked by without a second glance, her gaze seemingly skimming over the scene. The man's struggle was evident, yet Jessica prioritized serving another passenger requesting a glass of wine. Rising from his seat, Shaq effortlessly lifted the suitcase, placing it securely overhead. The elderly man turned to him, eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, young man. You're very kind." Shaq offered a modest smile. "It's nothing, sir. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. Megan, passing by at that moment, witnessed the exchange. She paused, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. Thank you for assisting him. That was very thoughtful of you. Shaq nodded, offering no further comment as he returned to his seat. From a distance, Jessica observed the entire interaction, a tumult of emotions she couldn't quite identify swirling within her. She realized that while Megan had sincerely thanked Shaq, she, despite her experience, hadn't even considered doing the same. Jessica rationalized that Shaq's gesture wasn't particularly noteworthy, but an unsettling feeling lingered, suggesting she'd overlooked something significant. Lingering in the background, Jessica continued to monitor Shaq. His meticulous observations, his interactions, and his composed demeanor all hinted that he wasn't a typical first-class passenger. Curiosity gnawed at her. Who was he? Yet, instead of delving deeper, she suppressed her thoughts, returning to her duties with a renewed determination to maintain a cold distance from Shaq, as if to prove his presence had no effect on her. As the flight neared its conclusion, Shaq noticed Jessica passing by without acknowledgement. He maintained his calm smile, unperturbed by the lack of courtesy. For Shaq, this wasn't about personal respect, it was about understanding the broader picture. Jessica's treatment of others was revealing facets of her character he was keen to comprehend. Jessica, on the other hand, couldn't shake her discomfort each time she encountered Shaq's serene, knowing smile. Unbeknownst to her, the flight was on the brink of unveiling a startling revelation, a truth she could never have anticipated. The aircraft touched down smoothly, a smattering of applause echoing from the rear cabin, a habitual gesture from passengers relieved by a safe landing. Shaq gathered his belongings, standing as he awaited the orderly disembarkation. He sensed Jessica's fleeting glance in his direction, but she neither paused nor offered a word of gratitude, hastening ahead as if eager to distance herself from him. At the baggage claim in Zurich airport, Shaq spotted Jessica in a secluded corner, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice, typically assertive, now sounded weary and strained. Evan, you can't call me every time you're in trouble. I've told you before, I'm not an ATM. I have my own life to deal with. Shaq halted, not intending to eavesdrop, but the desperation in her tone caught his attention. Jessica's voice grew firmer. You promised last time it would be the last, but here you are again with another excuse. I can't keep doing this. If you don't make changes yourself, I won't be able to help you anymore. Ending the call, she bowed her head, pressing her hands to her temples as if trying to maintain her composure. Alone in the corner, the tough exterior she usually projected seemed to crumble, revealing a woman overwhelmed by burdens heavier than anyone should bear alone. Approaching gently, Shaq spoke, his voice soft yet audible. Jessica. Startled, she looked up, her eyes red and weary. Instantly, she reassembled her cold demeanor, straightening and folding her arms defensively. What do you want now? She snapped. Shaq hesitated, then spoke slowly, his deep voice carrying a weight of significance. I think there's something you need to know. I'm not just any passenger. Jessica's eyes narrowed, suspicion evident. What are you implying? Taking a deep breath, Shaq continued. Jessica stood silently in the corner of Zurich airport, clutching the business card Shaquille O'Neal had handed her. His words resonated deeply, not as mere criticism but as a profound wake-up call. She realized she had to confront herself and make a change. Throughout her years in the aviation industry, Jessica had prided herself on professionalism and strict adherence to protocols, believing these were the keys to success. However, she now recognized that the mounting pressures of her personal life had eroded the empathy and compassion she once possessed. Upon returning from her flight, Jessica delved into the support programs Shaq had mentioned. The following day, she gathered the courage to email the HR department, expressing her desire to participate in counseling sessions and customer service training courses. This was a significant step for her, as she had always perceived herself as self-reliant and had never considered seeking help. In her first counseling session, Jessica sat across from the psychologist, her hands tightly clasped, filled with hesitation. When the counselor gently inquired, "What brings you the most stress?" Jessica couldn't hold back any longer. She opened up about her younger brother Evan, the overwhelming expectations from her family, and the constant feeling of bearing the weight of everything. Tears streamed down her face, not from weakness, but from the realization that she had long neglected her own feelings. Simultaneously, Jessica enrolled in an advanced customer service training program offered by her airline. There, she met Megan, a colleague she had previously dismissed as overly idealistic. However, Megan's enthusiasm during the training sessions challenged Jessica's preconceived notions. Megan not only imparted practical skills for handling challenging situations but also shared her personal experiences. She recounted her early days as a flight attendant, facing criticism from passengers and feeling unappreciated. "I realized," Megan said, "that if I let others' negativity dictate my emotions, I'd lose the strength to perform my duties effectively. I constantly remind myself that kindness is never out of style." These words resonated deeply with Jessica. She began to understand that kindness wasn't a sign of weakness but a deliberate choice to uphold her values. One afternoon, after a training session, Jessica received a small package from Our. Inside was a black hoodie with the phrase, "Kindness is never out of style," emblazoned in bold white letters. She didn't need to read the accompanying note to know who had sent it. Smiling, she felt a sense of relief for the first time in weeks. The hoodie served as a gentle reminder that, despite the challenges ahead, maintaining kindness would guide her journey. Returning to work, Jessica applied the lessons she had learned from Megan in her counseling sessions. She became more attentive in her interactions with passengers, striving to move beyond mere professionalism to genuine sincerity. On one flight, a young mother in economy class struggled to calm her crying baby. In the past, Jessica might have felt irritated or ignored the situation. This time, she approached the mother, knelt beside her, and asked, "Is there anything I can do to assist? Perhaps an extra blanket or a toy for your baby?" The sincerity in Jessica's voice brought the mother to tears. She expressed her gratitude repeatedly, and the baby eventually settled down, cuddling a stuffed animal Jessica had retrieved from the overhead compartment. Such small gestures soon became second nature to Jessica. She no longer viewed them as obligations but as opportunities to create positive experiences for others. Although she hadn't encountered Shaq again, Jessica felt his influence throughout her transformation journey. One day, she received an email from HR announcing that Shaq had proposed organizing more programs like the one she attended, focusing on managing personal stress and fostering compassion in the workplace. Jessica felt profound gratitude, not just because Shaq had given her a chance to change, but because he had seen potential in her when she couldn't see it herself. She knew there was still much to learn and improve upon, but she was no longer afraid to face challenges. With Megan's support and the airline's programs, Jessica was gradually discovering a better version of herself. She understood that change didn't happen overnight but was a continuous journey where every small step mattered. As she continued her journey, Jessica became more involved in the airline's community initiatives. She volunteered for programs aimed at enhancing passenger experience and even mentored new flight attendants, sharing her experiences and the importance of empathy in their roles. One day, during a layover, Jessica sat in a quiet corner of the airport, reflecting on her journey. She realized that the transformation she had undergone was not just about improving her professional demeanor but also about healing and understanding herself. She had learned to balance personal challenges with her responsibilities, ensuring that her struggles did not overshadow her interactions with others. Her colleagues began to notice the change in her demeanor. Jessica, once perceived as distant and strictly professional, was now approachable and warm. Passengers left positive feedback, often mentioning her by name and appreciating her genuine care and assistance during flights. Months later, Jessica received a letter from the airline's executive team. They commended her for her remarkable transformation and dedication to fostering a compassionate environment. They acknowledged that her efforts had not only improved passenger satisfaction but had also inspired her colleagues to adopt a more empathetic approach. The letter concluded with an invitation to join a task force dedicated to developing programs that support staff well-being and promote a culture of kindness within the airline. Jessica accepted the invitation, eager to contribute and share her insights. In her new role, Jessica collaborated with various departments to design workshops and resources focusing on stress management, effective communication, and the importance of empathy in customer service. She drew from her own experiences, understanding the challenges flight attendants faced and the pressures that could lead to burnout. Through these initiatives, Jessica aimed to create a support system for her colleagues, ensuring they had the tools and resources to manage personal and professional challenges effectively. She believed that by fostering a supportive environment, the airline could enhance both employee satisfaction and passenger experience. As the programs rolled out, the airline saw a noticeable improvement in staff morale and passenger feedback. Flight attendants reported feeling more equipped to handle stress and more connected to their colleagues. Passengers appreciated the enhanced level of service, noting the genuine care and attention they received during their journeys. Jessica's journey of transformation had come full circle. From a flight attendant struggling with personal pressures and a lack of empathy, she had evolved into a leader and advocate for compassion and support within the airline. Her experiences had not only changed her perspective but had also sparked a broader cultural shift within the organization. Reflecting on her journey, Jessica realized that the pivotal moment with Shaq had been the catalyst for her transformation. His words had challenged her to confront herself, to recognize her shortcomings, and to strive for better. But it was her commitment to change, her willingness to seek help, and her dedication to personal growth that had led her to where she was now. Jessica understood that the journey of self-improvement was ongoing. There would always be challenges to face and lessons to learn. But she was no longer daunted by this prospect. Instead, she embraced it, knowing that each step forward, no matter how small, was a testament to her resilience and commitment to being the best version of herself. In the end, Jessica's story was not just about personal transformation. It was about the ripple effect one person's change can have on others. Her journey had inspired her colleagues, improved passenger experiences, and contributed to a more compassionate and supportive culture within the airline. As she looked ahead, Jessica remained committed to her journey, ready to every time Jessica glanced at the hoodie hanging on her wall, a soft smile graced her lips. It wasn't just a piece of fabric, it was a symbol, a reminder that kindness wasn't solely meant for others but also for herself. That single thought carried a weight of transformation, a journey ignited by an encounter she never expected to be so profound. Carmen Hernandez had initially seen her trip from New York to Zurich as an escape from the relentless grind of her daily life. She had grown weary from balancing the demands of work and family, the expectations that seemed to weigh heavier with each passing day. What she hadn't anticipated was that this flight would change her perspective forever. She had shared a conversation with a man whose words lingered in her thoughts long after their meeting. A man she only later discovered was Shaquille O'Neal, a basketball icon and a formidable entrepreneur. Sitting in her modest apartment, Carmen found herself staring at a promotion application she had rewritten countless times. Every revision felt like an attempt to convince herself that she was worthy of more, yet she had never summoned the courage to submit it. Shaq's words echoed in her mind like a drumbeat against her self-doubt. Don't let others decide where you belong. Everyone deserves a chance to go after something great. For so long, she had let the fear of failure dictate her actions. Every time she considered taking a step forward, an inner voice questioned her worth. Am I really good enough? Do I deserve this opportunity? What if I fail? But this time, those doubts didn't carry the same power. A new thought had taken root in her mind, one that was stronger than her fear. If I don't try, will I be stuck here forever? One morning, Carmen found herself seated at her desk, her hand trembling as it hovered over her mouse. The cursor rested on the send button of an email that contained her promotion request. Her heart pounded, her pulse raced, but then she pictured Shaq's unwavering gaze, the certainty in his voice as he spoke about seizing one's own destiny. With a deep breath, she clicked send. A wave of emotions crashed over her: anxiety, excitement, uncertainty. But there was also something new, something liberating. Relief. For the first time, she had chosen courage over hesitation. Whatever the outcome, she had taken a step she had long feared. The waiting period that followed was agonizing. Self-doubt attempted to creep back in, whispering its familiar lies. But Carmen refused to succumb. Instead, she made subtle yet meaningful changes in her life. She enrolled in an online management course, something she had previously avoided because she feared she wasn't competent enough. She began reading more, trying new recipes, making time for small joys that had once seemed insignificant. Each action, however minor, gave her a sense of progress, a reminder that growth wasn't about speed but about consistency. Then, one afternoon at work, an email arrived. The subject line was concise yet powerful. Congratulations. Your promotion request has been approved. Carmen read the words once. Then again. And again. The reality of it sank in slowly, filling her with a sense of triumph. This wasn't just a promotion. It was proof that she had taken control of her narrative, that she had faced her fears and emerged victorious. Her new position came with challenges, but unlike before, she no longer felt paralyzed by them. Whenever uncertainty loomed, she thought back to that fateful flight, to Shaq's words, to the belief that she had cultivated within herself. And with every new hurdle, she reminded herself that she was capable of overcoming it. Inspired by her own journey, Carmen decided to share her experience on social media. In a heartfelt post, she recounted her conversation with the stranger who had unknowingly changed her life. He told me not to let others decide where I belong. Those words shifted something in me. I took a chance, stepped out of my comfort zone, and succeeded. If you're doubting yourself, remember, sometimes all it takes is one step. Her story resonated far and wide. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers reached out, sharing how her words had inspired them to take their own leaps of faith. Some pursued long-awaited career changes, while others finally mustered the courage to chase their dreams. Months later, an unexpected message found its way to Carmen's inbox. You won't believe this, it read. Shaquille O'Neal is a shareholder of Horizon Air. Could he really have been the man you met? Her breath caught. With hurried fingers, she searched online, and there it was, the undeniable truth. The kind, down-to-earth man she had spoken with wasn't just an entrepreneur, he was a legend. But oddly, knowing this didn't make his words any more meaningful. They had already held immeasurable value because they had come from someone who understood the power of kindness and belief. Elsewhere, on a flight from Los Angeles to New York, Shaq settled into his first-class seat. This time, he wasn't in disguise. As he boarded, he was greeted by a familiar face, Jessica Stone, a flight attendant whose demeanor had once been distant and detached. But now, she radiated warmth and confidence. Jessica recognized him instantly, but rather than being flustered, she met him with a genuine smile. Welcome back, Mr. O'Neal. It's an honor to serve you again. Shaq observed her throughout the flight, noting the transformation. She attended to passengers with patience and care, always ready with a kind word or a helping hand. When an elderly man struggled with his water bottle, she assisted him with ease. When a young girl appeared nervous about her first flight, Jessica offered comfort, her presence reassuring. It was the small moments that spoke volumes. As the flight neared its end, Shaq approached Jessica at the front of the cabin. Jessica, he said, his voice filled with admiration, I almost didn't recognize you. You've changed so much. Her smile softened, gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, Mr. O'Neal. I've learned a lot. Your words that day, they really made me think. Shaq nodded. What I've seen today proves that anyone can grow if they're willing to try. I'm proud of you. Jessica bowed her head slightly, her voice steady. Change isn't easy, but I've realized that being kind to others is also a way of being kind to yourself. Exactly, Shaq said, his smile widening. And remember, this journey never truly ends. Keep going. Before disembarking, Shaq made a note to recommend Jessica for a leadership development program. She had once been a flight attendant burdened by pressure. Now, she was a role model for her team. Not because she had become flawless, but because she had embraced growth. As Shaq stepped off the plane, Jessica stood at the door, her smile unwavering. See you again, Mr. O'Neal. And, thank you for everything. He turned back, his expression playful yet sincere. No, Jessica. Thank you. You're proof that real change is always possible. And with that, he walked away, knowing that their paths had crossed for a reason, a reminder that sometimes, the simplest acts of kindness could set extraordinary things into motion.